Before we begin this heartwarming story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our amazing emotional stories. Now, let's dive into what happened on that unforgettable day. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the palace grounds. As tourists gathered behind the metal barriers, cameras ready to capture any glimpse of the royal family. Among the crowd stood a young royal guard named James Mitchell, just 23 years old, standing at his post with perfect military precision. His red uniform was immaculate, his black bearskin hat sitting tall on his head. This was his first month on duty at the palace, and he took his responsibilities seriously. James had dreamed of this position since he was a boy. Watching the changing of the guard ceremony with his late father, now here he was, living that dream, though it was much harder than he had imagined. The rules were strict. He could not move, could not speak, could not react to anything happening around him. He had to remain like a statue, no matter what occurred. That particular morning started like any other. Tourists snapped photos, children pointed excitedly, and James maintained his stoic expression. But then a group of teenage boys approached, smartphones in hand, looking for entertainment. They started small, making faces at James, trying to get him to smile or flinch. When that did not work, they grew bolder. One boy stepped closer than the barriers allowed, waving his hands in front of James's face. Another made loud noises, trying to startle him. James's jaw tightened slightly, but he held his position. His training had prepared him for this, though it never made it easier. The boys laughed, enjoying their cruel game. While other tourists looked on uncomfortably but said nothing, the harassment continued for several minutes. One boy pretended to trip and bumped into James, then acted innocent when security glanced over. Another took a video, narrating mockingly about how the guard was like a robot. James felt sweat forming under his heavy uniform, not from the sun, but from the stress of maintaining composure while being treated so disrespectfully. What none of them noticed was a small figure watching from a palace window. Princess Charlotte, just 8 years old, had been practicing her piano lessons in the music room when the sounds of laughter drew her attention. She moved to the window and looked down at the scene unfolding below. Her blue eyes narrowed as she watched the boys tormenting the guard. Charlotte had been taught many things about royal duty and proper behavior, but she had also been taught something equally important by her parents. She had been taught about kindness, respect, and standing up for people who could not stand up for themselves. As she watched James standing there, unable to defend himself or walk away, something stirred in her young heart. This was not right. This was not how people should be treated, especially someone who was serving and protecting her family. Without hesitation, Charlotte left the music room. Her footsteps echoed through the palace corridors as she made her way toward the main entrance. Her nanny called after her, asking where she was going, but Charlotte simply said she had something important to do. There was a determination in her voice that made the nanny pause. Charlotte walked through the palace halls with purpose. Her small hands clenched into determined fists. She passed portraits of her ancestors, kings and queens, who had ruled with strength and dignity. She thought about what they might do in this situation. Would they ignore someone being treated badly? She did not think so. As she approached the main doors, one of the palace staff members noticed her. It was Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman who had worked at the palace for over 20 years. She recognized the look on Charlotte's face immediately. It was the same expression her mother, Princess Catherine, wore when she was about to do something important. Mrs. Henderson asked Charlotte where she was headed in such a hurry. Charlotte explained what she had seen from the window, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. The guard was being harassed, and nobody was stopping it. It was wrong. She wanted to help. Mrs. Henderson smiled gently and told Charlotte that her heart was in the right place, but perhaps she should tell security instead. Charlotte shook her head firmly. She had learned from watching her parents that sometimes leaders need to show themselves, need to be present when things matter. Security could handle rule breakers, but this was about something more. This was about showing respect and reminding people about basic human decency. She could not just send someone else to deal with it. Mrs. Henderson saw the determination in the young princess's eyes and made a decision. She would not stop Charlotte, but she would accompany her to make sure she stayed safe. Together, they walked toward the palace entrance. Other staff members noticed and began to follow, curious about what was happening. Outside, the situation had grown worse. The teenage boys had attracted a small crowd, some people filming the harassment on their phones, while others laughed along. James felt his legs aching from standing so still, his pride wounded by the mockery. He thought about his father and how proud he had been when James earned this position. He could not break protocol, no matter how much he wanted to tell these boys to show some respect. Just then, the large palace doors opened. The sound made several tourists turn their heads. What they saw made them gasp in surprise. Princess Charlotte walked out, her expression serious beyond her years. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly, and despite her young age, she carried herself with unmistakable royal bearing. The crowd fell silent immediately. Phones that had been recording the harassment were suddenly turned toward Charlotte. The teenage boys froze, their smiles disappearing as they realized who had just appeared. Even James, trained to remain motionless, felt his heart skip a beat. Though he kept his eyes forward, Charlotte walked directly toward the barrier where the boys stood. Her small frame seemed to grow larger with each step. When she reached them, she stopped and looked at each boy in turn. Her gaze was not angry exactly, but it was disappointed, which somehow felt worse. The boys shuffled their feet, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. In a clear, steady voice that carried across the suddenly quiet courtyard, Charlotte spoke. She told them that the guard they were mocking was a real person with feelings, with a family, with dreams. He was serving his country with honor and dedication. He stood there every day, rain or shine, protecting her family and maintaining a tradition that stretched back centuries. He deserved respect, not mockery. The boys stood frozen, their faces turning red with embarrassment. One of them tried to stammer an excuse, saying they were just having fun and did not mean any harm. Charlotte listened patiently and gently but firmly explained that fun should never come at the expense of someone else's dignity. True entertainment does not involve making another person uncomfortable or upset. She asked them to imagine how they would feel standing in that heavy uniform in the heat. Unable to move or speak while strangers made fun of them, would they find that funny? Would they want their own family members treated that way? The boys shook their heads, genuinely ashamed now. One could see tears forming in the youngest boy's eyes. Charlotte then did something unexpected. Instead of scolding them further or calling for security to remove them, she educated them. She explained the history of the Royal Guard, how these soldiers were among the finest in the British military. She told them about the rigorous training they underwent, the discipline required, and the honor of the position. She spoke with such passion and knowledge that the entire crowd listened. Captivated, James, still at his post, felt emotion welling up inside him. He had never expected anyone from the royal family to come to his defense, let alone the young princess. Her words were not just defending him, but honoring his service and the service of every guard who had stood at that post. It meant more to him than she could possibly know. The tourists began murmuring among themselves, and the mood shifted dramatically. People who had been passively watching the harassment now looked ashamed that they had not spoken up. Some began approaching the boys, adding their own gentle words about respect and proper behavior. The boys apologized to Charlotte, their voices sincere, promised they would never behave that way again. But Charlotte was not finished. She turned to face the crowd of tourists, her young voice somehow commanding attention from all the adults present. She thanked them for visiting and for their interest in her family's home. However, she reminded them that the guards were not attractions or entertainment. They were soldiers doing an important job, and they deserved the same courtesy anyone would expect at their own workplace. She then made a request that surprised everyone. She asked the crowd to show their appreciation for the Royal Guard by giving James a round of applause. For a moment there was silence, and then one person began to clap. Then another, and another, until the entire courtyard erupted in genuine, respectful applause. Cameras that had been recording mockery now captured this beautiful moment of recognition and respect. James felt the applause wash over him, though he maintained his position and expression as duty required. Inside, however, his heart was full. This young princess, who could have simply alerted security or ignored the situation entirely, had instead chosen to stand up for him personally. She had turned a moment of humiliation into one of honor. Charlotte smiled at the crowd, thanked them for their understanding, and then turned to walk back to the palace. But before she left, she did one more thing that would be talked about for years to come. She walked directly up to James, looked up at his face, and spoke quietly so only he could hear. She thanked him for his service and told him that her family appreciated everything he did. James wanted to respond, to thank her for her kindness, but protocol prevented him from speaking or moving. Charlotte seemed to understand this. She gave him a small, knowing smile, as if to say she knew he could not respond, but that his gratitude was understood anyway. Then she curtsied slightly, a gesture of respect that stunned everyone watching. A royal princess, 8th in line to the throne, had curtsied to a young guardsman. It was a gesture that spoke volumes about the values her parents had instilled in her. It said that titles and crowns did not make someone more valuable than another person. It said that service and dedication deserved recognition regardless of rank. It was a simple gesture that carried profound meaning. As Charlotte walked back toward the palace entrance, the crowd remained silent, processing what they had just witnessed. Then the applause started again, this time for Charlotte herself. Tourists called out words of admiration, telling her she was a wonderful princess and that her parents should be proud. Charlotte waved politely but did not seek the attention. She had done what needed to be done, nothing more. Mrs. Henderson met her at the door, tears in her eyes. She hugged Charlotte gently and whispered that she had done a beautiful thing. Other staff members who had gathered to watch nodded in agreement. Charlotte simply said that it was the right thing to do and asked if she could return to her piano practice now. Her humility about the entire situation was remarkable. Word of what had happened spread through the palace quickly. Within the hour, Princess Catherine and Prince William heard about their daughter's actions. They found Charlotte in the music room, practicing scales as if nothing unusual had occurred. When they asked her about it, she explained matter-of-factly that the guard was being treated unfairly, so she spoke up. She did not think it was anything special. Catherine knelt down beside her daughter, taking her small hands in her own. She told Charlotte that what she had done showed great courage and compassion. Many adults would have walked past that situation or assumed someone else would handle it, but Charlotte had recognized injustice and acted to correct it. That took real bravery, especially for someone so young. William added that being royal came with responsibilities, but it also came with opportunities to make positive differences in people's lives. Charlotte had used her position not for personal gain, but to defend someone who could not defend himself. That was exactly the kind of leadership their family valued. He could not have been more proud of her. Charlotte listened to her parents' praise with a modest smile. She admitted that she had been nervous walking out there, worried she might say the wrong thing or make the situation worse. But when she saw the guard standing there, taking that treatment so professionally, she knew she had to try to help. Someone needed to remind those boys in the watching crowd about basic human respect. That evening, news of Charlotte's actions reached the palace administration. The incident had been captured on multiple phones, and videos were already appearing online. The palace communication team prepared a statement, but William and Catherine decided against making it a major news story. They wanted Charlotte to understand that doing the right thing should be its own reward, not something done for publicity or praise. However, they could not control what the public did with the story. By the next morning, videos of Charlotte defending the guard had gone viral around the world. Social media exploded with admiration for the young princess. People shared the clips with comments about how she represented the best of the royal family, how she had been raised with proper values, and how she had taught adults a lesson in basic decency. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines about Charlotte's compassionate intervention. Royal commentators discussed how her actions reflected the modern monarchy's values. Many compared her to her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who had also been known for her respect toward all people regardless of their position. The videos showed Charlotte's serious expression as she addressed the teenage boys, her clear voice explaining why their behavior was wrong. And that stunning moment when she curtsied to James, people watched that moment repeatedly. Moved by its simplicity and significance, comments poured in from veterans, active military members, and everyday citizens thanking Charlotte for standing up for those who serve. James Mitchell found himself unexpectedly famous as well. Reporters tracked him down, wanting to know how he felt about Charlotte's defense. In carefully worded statements approved by his superiors, he expressed gratitude for her kindness and said it reminded him why he wore the uniform. Her words had meant everything to him during a difficult moment, and he would never forget her compassion. The teenage boys involved in the incident also came forward, surprisingly. With their parents' support, they released a public apology explaining that they had learned an important lesson that day. They had not considered the guards' feelings or the disrespect they were showing. Princess Charlotte had opened their eyes, and they were genuinely sorry. They promised to treat everyone with more respect going forward. Schools began using the incident as a teaching moment. Teachers showed the videos to students and led discussions about empathy, standing up to bullying and treating everyone with dignity regardless of their job or status. Charlotte unknowingly became a role model for children worldwide, demonstrating that you are never too young to make a difference or too important to show kindness to others. The Royal Guard itself was touched by Charlotte's defense of their service. Senior officers discussed the incident during briefings, using it to remind guardsmen that their duty was valued and appreciated at the highest levels. Morale improved across the regiment, with soldiers feeling renewed pride in their roles. Several guards mentioned that when the job became difficult, they would remember the young princess who stood up for one of their own. Back at the palace, life returned to normal for Charlotte. She continued her lessons, practiced piano, played with her siblings, and went about her usual routine. But something had changed, even if she did not fully realize it yet. People looked at her differently now, with increased respect and admiration. She had proven herself to be someone special, not because of her title, but because of her character. Her siblings, Prince George and Prince Louis, heard the story from their parents. George, older and more aware of royal duties, told Charlotte he was proud of her. Louis, younger and more playful, simply hugged his sister and told her she was brave. The three children remained close, their bond strengthened by their parents' emphasis on supporting one another. Princess Catherine took the opportunity to have a deeper conversation with Charlotte about the responsibility that came with their position. She explained that people would always watch them, judge their actions, and form opinions based on what they saw. This could feel like pressure, but it was also an opportunity to inspire positive change and model good behavior for others. Charlotte listened thoughtfully to her mother's words. She understood that what seemed like a simple action to her had created ripples far beyond what she imagined. It was a bit overwhelming to see herself in news reports and on social media. But her parents helped her understand that the attention was not really about her. It was about the message she had sent, the reminder about treating everyone with dignity. Weeks passed, and while the media attention gradually faded, the impact of Charlotte's actions lingered. The palace noticed a change in how visitors behaved around the guards. Tourists were more respectful, keeping proper distance and taking photos without harassment. Some even thanked the guards verbally, knowing they could not respond but wanting to express appreciation anyway. Charlotte's example had created a cultural shift in how people interacted with the Royal Guard. James Mitchell continued his service with renewed dedication. He was eventually promoted and given additional responsibilities. In interviews years later, he would always mention that day as a turning point in his career, the moment when he truly understood the meaning of his service. A young princess had seen his worth and defended his dignity, and that motivated him to be the best guardsman he could possibly be. The teenage boys who had harassed James also experienced lasting changes. One of them wrote an essay about the experience for his school, discussing how a single moment of poor judgment had taught him a valuable life lesson. Another became involved in anti-bullying campaigns, using a story to show others how easy it is to hurt someone without thinking about consequences. They had made a mistake, but Charlotte's gracious response had given them a chance to grow from it rather than simply be punished. Charlotte herself grew up with this incident, becoming part of her story, though she rarely spoke about it publicly. As she got older and took on more royal duties, people would reference that day as evidence of her character. She had shown compassion and courage at age 8, and those qualities only strengthened as she matured. Her parents continued to instill in all their children the values that had guided Charlotte that day. They taught them that true nobility came from how you treated others, especially those who could not benefit you in return. They explained that being royal meant using your privilege to uplift others, to give voice to the voiceless, and to stand against injustice wherever you found it. Years later, when Charlotte was older, a reporter asked her about the incident. She smiled at the memory and said she had simply done what her heart told her was right. She had seen someone being treated badly, and she knew she had the ability to help, so she did. She hoped everyone would do the same in similar situations, royal or not. Standing up for others should not be unusual or newsworthy. It should be normal human behavior. The story of Princess Charlotte and the Royal Guard came one of those moments that defined a generation's view of the monarchy. It showed that the royal family could be both traditional and modern, maintaining centuries-old customs while also demonstrating contemporary values of equality and respect. Charlotte had bridged that gap beautifully without even trying. For James Mitchell, the memory remained crystal clear throughout his military career. He kept a small newspaper clipping about the incident in his wallet, a reminder that his service mattered and was appreciated. When he eventually retired from the Royal Guard and began training new recruits, he told them Charlotte's story. He wanted them to understand that standing at that post with dignity was important, that their duty meant something to people who truly mattered. The palace courtyard where everything happened remained unchanged, with guards standing their posts in the same spots where James had stood that memorable day. But the atmosphere around those posts was different now. There was a culture of respect that had not been as strong before. Charlotte's actions had reminded the world that behind every uniform stood a real person deserving of courtesy and appreciation. As time passed, the incident became a teaching story shared across platforms and in classrooms worldwide. It was discussed in ethics courses, leadership seminars, and character education programs. The simple act of an 8-year-old girl standing up for a guardsman had become a powerful example of moral courage that transcended borders and cultures. Charlotte continued to grow into her role as a member of the royal family, always carrying with her the lessons from that day. She learned that actions speak louder than titles, that compassion requires courage, and that making the world better sometimes means simply speaking up when you see something wrong. These lessons would guide her throughout her life, shaping the kind of princess and eventually the kind of leader she would become.